In these real aviation incidents, one problem was enough to change the flight. A landing gear failure, a runway overrun, a hard landing, or a low altitude mistake. Each case shows how fast control can turn into an emergency. This is not just plane crash footage. It is a closer look at what went wrong, how the crews reacted, and why every decision mattered. On June 7th, 2024, a Beechcraft T-34A Mentor crashed near Deer Harbor, Washington. The pilot was flying over water near the San Juan Islands. Witness video showed the airplane upside down and descending in a split S maneuver. The pilot began to pull out, but there was not enough altitude. The airplane struck the water, and the pilot was killed. The NTSB found no evidence of engine failure or structural failure before impact. Investigators said the pilot performed an aerobatic maneuver too low over the water. The lesson is clear. Aerobatics need altitude. If the maneuver starts too low, there may be no chance to recover. On July 30th, 1971, Pan Am Flight 845 was preparing to depart San Francisco for Tokyo. The aircraft was a Boeing 747. During takeoff from runway 01 right, it did not climb high enough to clear the approach lights beyond the end of the runway. The aircraft struck the light structure, causing serious damage to the landing gear and other aircraft systems. But the crew kept it flying. They climbed away, flew out over the Pacific, dumped fuel, checked the damage as much as they could, and prepared to return to San Francisco. The Boeing 747 came back and landed on runway 28 left. After touchdown, the damaged landing gear made the rollout difficult. The aircraft left the runway and came to a stop. During the evacuation, it later tilted back onto its tail. Everyone on board survived, but 29 people were injured. The NTSB found that the probable cause was incorrect takeoff speeds. The aircraft had first been planned for a different runway. After the runway was changed, the correct takeoff speeds were not calculated again. The lesson is clear. On a large aircraft, takeoff speeds are not just paperwork. If the numbers are wrong, even a Boeing 747 may not have enough performance when it matters most. On May 10, 2026, a Cessna Aerobat had just taken off from Superior Municipal Airport in Arizona. Soon after departure, the airplane came down toward Highway 60, directly in front of a pickup truck. The driver moved left. The airplane crossed over the road and its wing passed above the cab. Then, the propeller struck the rear of the truck. The aircraft hit a road sign and stopped nearby. No one in the truck was injured. The pilot also survived. The FAA and NTSB are investigating. The official cause has not been released. Local reports said the airplane may have stalled after takeoff, but that has not been confirmed as the final cause. The lesson is simple. Right after takeoff, there is very little altitude and very little time. If the airplane cannot keep climbing, the pilot has to choose a landing area immediately. And on a highway, moving traffic becomes part of the emergency.
Oh, look, you guys, look. Yeah. Oh my god, why is he so low? Holy!
On May 4th, 2026, Korean Air Flight KE707 was landing at Narita Airport in Japan. The flight had arrived from Seoul. On final approach, strong wind gusts pushed the Airbus A321 from side to side. Close to the runway, the aircraft rocked sharply. The approach was no longer stable. The pilots did not force the landing. They added power, climbed away, and performed a go-around. The aircraft later came back for another approach and landed safely. No injuries were reported. No aircraft damage was reported. The landing was rejected because the approach became unstable in strong crosswind conditions. The lesson is simple. A go-around is not a mistake. When the aircraft is not stable near the runway, the safer choice is to climb away and try again. On March 22, 2025, a Russian Su-34 came in with its landing gear still up. The crew had one real decision before touchdown: eject or attempt a belly landing on the runway. Before the final approach, a section of the cockpit canopy was released. After a belly landing, the normal exit path could be blocked, so the crew prepared their way out before the aircraft ever touched the runway. From that point, the landing depended on the setup. The jet had to arrive aligned with the runway, stable, and without extra speed. When it touched down on the lower engine nacelles, this was no longer a normal landing roll. There were no wheels to steer with. The emergency was caused by the landing gear failing to extend. The exact technical reason has not been officially confirmed. This is why the preparation mattered. In a belly landing, the real control is mostly before touchdown. Alignment, attitude, speed, runway length, drag chutes, and making sure the crew can get out after the aircraft stops. On August 9, 2024, a Dash 8 operated by Renegade Air landed at Malakal Airport in South Sudan. The aircraft was flying for the UN Humanitarian Air Service, with 38 people on board. Before landing, the crew was already dealing with a serious nose gear problem. What mattered most was the setup before contact: speed, alignment, runway choice, and emergency crews ready nearby. Everyone on board survived. No fatalities were reported. Reports suggest the problem may have started after contact with an obstacle during departure from Maban, but the exact sequence has not been officially confirmed. This case shows how much can depend on what happens before the aircraft reaches the runway. By the time it arrived at Malakal, the crew had one goal: make the approach as stable as possible and give everyone on board the best chance to survive. On January 27, 2020, Caspian Airlines Flight 6936 landed at Bandar Mashar Airport in Iran. The aircraft was arriving from Tehran. Before touchdown, the approach was already unstable. The MD-83 was too fast, too high, and landing with a tailwind. The crew continued instead of going around. By the time the aircraft touched down, there was not enough runway left to stop. It overran the runway and came to rest on a city road beyond the airport. Everyone on board survived. Investigators found that the accident was caused by the continued unstable approach, excessive landing speed, poor crew coordination, and the failure to go around. The important point is this: a go-around has to happen early. Once a fast aircraft lands too far down the runway, there may be no runway left to fix the mistake.
هواپیمای تهران آقا یون برین کنار دور شید
چمدون کو؟ نه اینه
علی بیا
کیفت نیست؟ چی توش داری؟ گفت من میارم برو پایین بهش کن آقا نگرانم کیفتو برداشتی؟ مهدی کیفت بنزین داره میره ازش مهدی خبرشون رو سریع اعلام کنی
On May 8th, 2026, Frontier Airlines Flight 4345 was taking off from Denver International Airport. The Airbus A321neo was heading for Los Angeles, with 231 people on board. During the takeoff roll, an unauthorized person was on runway 17 left. The crew reported the strike and rejected the takeoff. The aircraft stopped on the runway, but the impact led to an engine fire and smoke inside the cabin. The passengers and crew evacuated using emergency slides. The person on the runway was killed. Everyone on board survived. 12 people reported minor injuries, and 5 were taken to hospitals. Airport officials said the person had breached the perimeter fence before entering the active runway. The investigation is still open. So far, this is being treated as a runway incursion involving an unauthorized person, not a confirmed aircraft malfunction. This case shows how little time a crew has once takeoff speed is building. A runway has to stay protected, because when an aircraft is already accelerating, one person in the wrong place can turn the takeoff into an emergency within seconds. On May 14th, 2026, an experimental ultralight prototype called Simpledog was flying a low-altitude test in Shangyu, China. Available information says its center of gravity was too far forward. That made it hard for the pilot to raise the nose and keep the aircraft climbing normally. Near the end of the runway, the aircraft began losing height. There were parked vehicles and a utility pole ahead. The pilot tried to turn left, but there was very little height left. The aircraft touched down hard, bounced, hit a power line, and struck the utility pole with its right wing. The nose became caught on the wire, damaging the front of the aircraft and the right wing. The pilot survived with minor injuries. No official accident report has been published yet. From the available information, the forward center of gravity appears to be the main factor. This is the risk with early test flights. An aircraft can lift off and still be unsafe to climb. If the balance is wrong, the pilot may not have enough control margin to recover, especially close to the ground. On April 18, 1993, Japan Air System Flight 451 was landing at Hanamaki Airport in Japan. The aircraft was a DC-9, arriving from Nagoya. Weather around the runway was changing quickly, with strong gusts. In the final seconds of approach, the aircraft hit severe wind shear and a downdraft. It dropped suddenly. The captain tried to recover, but there was almost no altitude left. The jet hit the runway hard, damaging its landing gear and right wing. Fuel spilled, and a fire broke out. All 77 people on board survived. 3 people were seriously injured. The official report said severe wind shear on approach was the main factor. The recovery came too late to prevent the hard landing. Close to the ground, wind shear leaves almost no margin. If the approach does not look safe, the crew has to go around before the aircraft gets too low. On June 12, 2024, a Twin Commander 690D came in to land at Sorocaba Airport in Brazil. The aircraft had a nose gear problem. Before landing, the pilot made a low pass so people on the ground could check the gear position. The nose landing gear had not extended, so the pilot came back and set up for a landing on the main wheels. The important work happened before the nose came down. Speed, alignment, attitude, and keeping the aircraft stable on the runway centerline. The nose was held off as long as there was enough speed. After it settled onto the runway, the aircraft had limited control and was mainly slowing through friction. No one was injured. The aircraft slowed enough to clear the runway by a taxiway, so the airport was not blocked for long. The confirmed emergency was a failure of the nose landing gear to extend. The exact technical reason has not been officially confirmed. In a landing without the nose gear, the safest outcome is shaped before contact. Once the nose is on the runway, there is very little control left, so the setup before touchdown matters most. On April 21st, 2023, a Beechcraft King Air 200 arrived at Salta, Argentina after a flight from Antofagasta de la Sierra. Before landing, the crew detected a landing gear problem and declared an emergency. Rescue crews were already waiting near the runway. At that point, the critical work was already done before touchdown. The approach, the speed, the alignment, and the runway choice. After contact, there was very little normal control left. The aircraft slid along the runway and came to a stop. All 9 people on board survived. There were 2 crew members and 7 passengers. No injuries were reported. Argentina's Transportation Safety Board classified the accident as a non-engine system failure. The confirmed emergency was a landing gear malfunction before landing. The exact technical reason has not been confirmed in the basic report. In a belly landing, the outcome depends mostly on the setup before contact. If the gear will not come down, the crew has to prepare the aircraft, have emergency crews ready, and arrive as stable as possible before the runway does the rest.
No, ya le están tirando agua ya. Están mojando a todo el mundo.
On June 5th, 2023, a small aircraft came into land at Videira, Brazil. The pilot was alone on board. Before landing, he stayed in the air to burn off fuel and reduce the risk of fire. Rescue crews were already waiting near the runway. The aircraft landed with a gear problem and stopped without catching fire. The 58-year-old pilot got out without injury. The confirmed emergency was a mechanical problem with the landing gear. The exact cause has not been published. The useful context is what happened before touchdown. Less fuel, rescue crews ready, and a safer setup for the landing. On February 10th, 2025, a Twin Commander 690D arrived at Sorocaba Airport in Brazil. The aircraft was coming from Paraná with a landing gear problem. The gear appeared to be down, but it was not safely locked. Before touchdown, the pilot had to treat it as an unsafe gear landing. The important part was the setup: speed, alignment, runway choice, and rescue crews ready near the runway. When the aircraft touched down, the main gear collapsed. There was no fire. 4 people were on board, and all of them got out safely. Brazilian investigators were notified after the accident. Available reports say the gear extended but did not lock correctly. The exact technical reason has not been officially confirmed. This case shows why a gear indication cannot be ignored. If the gear is down but not locked, the landing can still become a slide the moment weight comes onto the wheels. On May 13, 2026, a Piper Seneca came in to land at Santa Ana Airport in Beni, Bolivia. Before arrival, the pilot was already dealing with a nose gear failure. Runway 33 was available, so the focus was on the setup before contact. A steady approach, good alignment, and the lowest safe speed. The aircraft was damaged during the landing, but it remained on the runway and came to a stop. No injuries were reported. The confirmed emergency was a failure of the nose landing gear to deploy. The exact technical reason has not been officially published. In a landing without the nose gear, most of the important work happens before touchdown. Once the front of the aircraft is on the runway, normal steering is limited. The outcome depends on the setup, speed, alignment, runway length, and keeping the aircraft as stable as possible before contact.
¿golpeó hélices, no?
Sí.
Parece que no.
No, le dio.